Imagine an invisible arms race happening right now. I
Yeah.
mean, one that doesn't involve nuclear warheads, stealth bombers, or, standing armies.
Right, because we are so used to thinking of national security in terms of physical borders and airspace. But this is entirely different.
Exactly. We are talking about microscopic particles that could, in an instant, render every military secret, every bank account, and, well, every secure communication completely obsolete.
It really is the ultimate invisible threat. The battleground has fundamentally shifted to the subatomic level.
So today's deep dive is a strategic policy analysis. We are zeroing in on a critical research paper recently published by NITI Aayog's Frontier Tech Hub, or NITI FT.
Yeah, and that was in collaboration with the Data Security Council of India. And for you listening, we are treating this as a current affairs war room discussion.
Right, because our mission today is unpacking the strategic implications of quantum computing for national security. This isn't just a tech update.
No, absolutely not. It forces us to look at the direct intersection of theoretical physics and global geopolitical dominance. It's a stark warning about a looming shift in global power.
And if you are analyzing this for governance or strategic policy, you have to understand the underlying pattern. So let's start with the background layer.
Good call. Before we map out the threat matrix, we have to establish what this technology actually is and, how it breaks the established rules of classical computing.
Classical computing being the binary system, the device you're listening to us on right now. It uses bits, which are tiny switches that are either off or on, 0 or 1.
Right. It processes information in a very linear way, one step at a time. But quantum computing throws that entire linear model out the window.
Because it operates on qubits, right, quantum bits.
Exactly. And unlike classical bits, qubits don't have to choose between being a 0 or a 1. They can exist in multiple states simultaneously. The NIT Aayog paper highlights 3 core concepts here.
Let me guess. Superposition, entanglement, and interference.
You got it. And superposition is the one that really bends the mind. It's that ability to hold multiple states at once.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy because the concept is dense. If classical computing is like trying to find the exit of a maze by walking down every single path one by one.
You get a dead end, turn around, try the next one.
Yeah, exactly. Then quantum computing and superposition is like sending a million versions of yourself down every single path at the exact same time.
That's a great way to visualize it. The parallel processing capability is unimaginable. But, and this is a massive but, the paper notes a brutal engineering reality called decoherence.
Decoherence. So what triggers that?
Basically, the moment you measure, observe, or even slightly disturb that qubit, the superposition collapses. It just instantly reverts back to a normal single state of either 0 or 1.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. What actually counts as a disturbance? Are we talking about someone physically bumping the machine?
I mean, literally any environmental noise. Heat is actually the biggest enemy because at room temperature, atoms are vibrating constantly.
Right, thermal energy.
Exactly. That tiny amount of thermal energy is enough to bump a qubit and destroy the superposition. Which is why these computers look like giant golden chandeliers housed inside complex cryogenic cooling systems.
They have to be cooled down to near absolute 0, right, just to stop the atoms from vibrating. That is a massive structural engineering challenge.
It is. And it brings us to the second core concept, entanglement. This is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance.
I love that phrase. So how does the spooky action actually work in a policy context?
Well, when 2 quantum particles become entangled, they form a linked system. Whatever happens to one particle instantly affects the other, regardless of the physical distance between them.
So you could keep one in a lab in New Delhi, send the other to the moon, and they react simultaneously, which is obviously the holy grail for secure communications.
Absolutely. The NTI Aayog paper focuses heavily on this for unhackable networks.
So wait, I have to ask, why is it inherently unhackable? What physically stops a hostile intelligence agency from just, tapping the wire?
It comes down to observation. At the subatomic level, a photon carries momentum. If a spy tries to intercept an entangled communication stream, they physically have to interact with the particles.
Oh, and that interaction causes the decoherence we just talked about.
Exactly. That tiny bump from the spy's sensor collapses the quantum state. The very act of trying to read the message destroys it.
That is brilliant. You would immediately know the line was compromised. So, moving to the third mechanism, interference, how does that fit in?
So having a million versions of yourself in a maze is great.
Yeah.
But how do you know which one found the exit without looking at all of them and collapsing the system?
Right, doesn't it just create a massive soup of noise?
It would, except quantum algorithms are mathematically designed to use wave behavior. They choreograph the quantum states so that all the incorrect answers destructively interfere. They cancel each other out.
While the correct answer constructively amplifies. Okay, so when you combine parallel processing, instantaneous communication, and self-correcting wave probabilities.
You get a technology that moves squarely onto the modern battlefield. And this is where we shift to the significance analysis for national security.
Let's do that. The paper outlines some sweeping military applications. We are talking about optimizing global supply chains and using quantum AI for autonomous defense systems.
Yeah, drone swarms that communicate instantly or revolutionizing hypersonic missile guidance. But the section that is truly alarming is about intelligence and espionage, specifically SIGINT.
Signals intelligence. Because right now, nations intercept vast amounts of encrypted communications, and since classical computers can't break the encryption, they just hoard it.
It's the harvest now, decrypt later strategy. They are storing petabytes of encrypted data, just waiting for computing technology to catch up. And quantum computing is that technology.
But let me push back a bit. Classical encryption is constantly upgrading. Why can't we just make the mathematical passwords longer and more complicated?
Because of how modern encryption works. The systems protecting your bank or military comms rely on prime factorization, multiplying massive prime numbers to create a key.
Right, which takes classical computers thousands of years to guess one by one.
Exactly. But a quantum computer uses superposition to evaluate all possible factors simultaneously. It slices through those mathematical barriers in minutes or hours.
So making the password longer just adds, what, a few extra seconds of processing time?
Barely even that. Which means nations possessing this quantum decryption capability will gain an absolute strategic advantage. Our current mathematical walls are essentially made of paper to them.
And this interlinks directly with the economy. The threat doesn't stop at military borders. The cryptography risks outline a systemic vulnerability for global finance.
SWIFT transfers, digital payments, corporate intellectual property, it's all at risk. The paper explicitly warns of unprecedented economic espionage.
Which brings up the timeline. People always ask, is this a problem for 5 years from now or 50 years from now?
Experts call it Q-Day, the day a quantum computer successfully breaks standard encryption. But whether it's 5 or 20 years away almost doesn't matter because of that harvest now, decrypt later reality.
If they steal your encrypted blueprints today, the data is permanently compromised. The geopolitical leverage begins immediately.
Precisely. Strategic dominance in quantum research equates directly to international leverage. The countries leading this will set the global standards.
Okay, so let's shift to the critical evaluation layer. Where does India currently stand? Because the report paints a pretty brutal picture of the starting line.
It's a very candid assessment. Let's look at the facts and data memory layer here. India has allocated 6,003 crore rupees for the national quantum mission.
6,003 crore. That's roughly 750 million US dollars. Now, that sounds like a massive investment.
In a vacuum, yes. But quantum supremacy is a comparative game. The US and China are pouring tens of billions into this, backed by massive private tech giants. India's budget is orders of magnitude smaller.
And that funding gap creates a structural problem. It limits infrastructure and long-term research. But beyond the money, there's a glaring supply chain vulnerability.
This is the most critical bottleneck. Remember those complex cryogenic cooling systems and high-purity materials we discussed? India lacks the indigenous manufacturing capabilities to produce them at scale.
So if we don't manufacture our own cryogenics, we are basically building a futuristic house on a rented foundation.
Exactly. You cannot claim strategic autonomy if your entire supply chain can be choked off overnight by an export control or trade embargo.
If a foreign supplier stops shipping refrigeration units, the whole national program grinds to a halt. That directly challenges the goals of Atmanirbhar Bharat.
It does. And the report also highlights an ecosystem imbalance. In the West, innovation is driven by private capital, Google, IBM. In India, it's almost entirely reliant on government-funded academia.
So there's no bridge to commercialization. It's the classic valley of death for hardware startups.
Exactly. But look, NITI Aayog doesn't just point out the flaws. They provide a highly detailed government response framework.
Right, the actionable blueprint. Let's analyze this through policy and governance reform. They strongly advocate for establishing a quantum security task force.
This task force would constantly monitor global advancements and develop an early warning system for encryption vulnerabilities.
And then there's the post-quantum cryptography transition plan, which, if you think about it, is like retrofitting an entire city's foundation to withstand a massive earthquake that we know is coming?
It's a staggering capacity building exercise. You have to go to every bank vault and government database and swap out the security architecture while the system is still running.
And to fix the rented foundation issue, the blueprint pushes for technology adoption and public-private partnerships. We need domestic factories building those processors and refining those isotopes.
Using tech transfers and local production incentives to break that foreign dependency. But, and this is key, the policy framework admits total isolation is impossible.
Right, which leads to the way forward framework, international cooperation. The report advises forging bilateral collaborations with the US, EU, and Japan.
Part of that diplomatic effort is advocating for relaxed export controls on those critical components, buying us time while we build the domestic manufacturing base.
Okay, so if you are converting this entire discussion into an answer writing structure, say a 250-word analytical brief.
You start with the context. The paradigm shift from classical to quantum computing in Q-Day.
Then the dimensions. Military SIGINT, economic espionage, and the breakdown of classical encryption.
Followed by the challenges. The funding gap of the NQM, the cryogenic supply chain vulnerability, and the academic-heavy ecosystem.
And your recommendations would focus on the NTI-IOG blueprint, the Quantum Security Task Force, the Post-Quantum Transition Plan, and aggressive bilateral tech transfers.
Concluding with the interlinking concept that quantum advancement is no longer just scientific capability, it is the bedrock of strategic autonomy and national security.
Perfect. So let's lock this in with a final revision capsule. Give me 5 must-remember facts from this deep dive.
1. Quantum computing uses qubits existing in superposition. 2. It threatens classical encryption via the harvest now, decrypt later strategy. 3. India's NQM budget is 6,003 crore rupees.
4. The primary bottleneck is a lack of indigenous, cryogenic, and high-purity material manufacturing.
And 5. NTI-IOG's solution includes a quantum security task force and a post-quantum cryptography transition plan.
And a probable exam or policy question to think about. Evaluate the strategic implications of quantum computing for India's national security, highlighting the infrastructural bottlenecks and policy responses proposed by NITI Aayog.
The keywords you want to underline there are Q-Day, decoherence, strategic autonomy, tech transfers, and post-quantum cryptography.
That is a phenomenal summary. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
What's the hidden tension here?
Well, the NITI Aayog report strongly advocates for expanding global partnerships and relaxing export controls so India can access these vital components.
Right, relying on allies.
But think about the geopolitical reality we just mapped out. The nation that leads in quantum technology sets the global standards, can read every encrypted secret, and gains absolute strategic dominance.
It's an invisible monopoly.
Exactly. So why would the current global leaders ever actually agree to share the keys to the quantum kingdom?
That is the defining paradox of technological statecraft for the next century.
It really is. Thank you for joining us in the War Room for this deep dive. Keep questioning the digital security you take for granted because that invisible arms race is already well underway.